What if Huey Long became president? The Great Depression remains one of the darkest periods in American history, marked by intense economic hardship, widespread unemployment, and a nation desperately searching for answers. In this dire time, leaders like Franklin D. Roosevelt offered hope with the New Deal. Yet another figure loomed large as an alternative for radical change: Huey Long. Known as the Kingfish, Huey Long was the fiery, magnetic senator from Louisiana who captivated millions with his populist ideals and promised to redistribute wealth in America. Revered as a savior by many and reviled as a demagogue by others, Huey Long's vision often divided opinion. But what if he had lived long enough to become president? Would his bold policies have saved the nation, caused chaos, or set it on a dangerous authoritarian path? Let's dive into this fascinating what-if scenario. Huey Long's ascent to national prominence was meteoric. Born into a modest Louisiana family, Long built his political career as a man of the people. He became governor of Louisiana in 1928, reforming the state with ambitious programs to build schools, roads, and hospitals. His policies brought tangible progress for the working class, but also earned him fierce opposition for his authoritarian methods and centralization of power. By 1930, Long was a senator representing Louisiana. But he wasn't content to merely legislate. His eyes were firmly set on the presidency. Fringe in early national politics, his Share Our Wealth program gained traction among Americans struggling through the Great Depression. As Long railed against corporate monopolies and the inequality of the rich getting richer at the expense of the poor, he became both a voice of hope and a symbol of potential danger. In 1935, Long was positioning himself for a presidential bid in the 1936 election when he was tragically assassinated. But what if that bullet missed? What if Long not only lived but succeeded in his presidential ambitions? Huey Long surviving his assassination would have sent shockwaves through American politics. It's highly probable he would run for president in 1936, mounting a bold third-party challenge against Franklin D. Roosevelt. While Roosevelt's New Deal alleviated some of the Great Depression's hardships, it didn't satisfy everyone. Farmers, laborers, and the unemployed often felt left out. Long's rhetoric directly appealed to this discontented base. Long's Share Our Wealth campaign proposed seizing excessive wealth from millionaires and redistributing it among the poor. He envisioned income caps, free college education, shorter working hours, and a national pension system. Populist and divisive, his message was simple: every family deserves a home, car, and basic economic security. It's easy to imagine Long galvanizing wide support, potentially splintering the Democratic vote. Could he have unseated Roosevelt? Or would the challenge merely fracture the Democratic stronghold, allowing a Republican win? Either way, the political landscape of 1936 would be unrecognizable. Imagining Huey Long in the Oval Office brings one overarching question to mind. What kind of president would he have been? A national rollout of his Share Our Wealth program would be his centerpiece. Long's economic reforms aimed at radical redistribution of wealth, income caps, confiscatory taxation, and social programs for the working poor were revolutionary for the time. Supporters of Long often argue these policies could have closed the vast wealth gap in 1930s America, giving millions a fair shot at prosperity. Critics, though, raise red flags about the feasibility and fairness of such a radical approach. Would the elites have tolerated this upheaval, or would they resist with economic and political sabotage? Another key consideration: how sustainable were Long's ideas? America's capitalist system would have likely clashed violently with such far-reaching reforms. Besides economics, Long undoubtedly would have reshaped American infrastructure. As governor, he quickly modernized Louisiana with highways, bridges, and schools. A President Long might have pursued similar nationwide initiatives, effectively turning infrastructure expansion into his legacy. Huey Long's leadership style raises questions about democracy and power. As both governor and senator, he concentrated influence in his own hands, breaking norms and sidelining opposition. Would this tendency have continued or even worsened if he were president? To pass his ambitious reforms, Long likely would have centralized power further, using executive orders and challenging the independence of Congress and the Supreme Court. America's checks and balances, while durable, could have faced unprecedented strain. This raises an uncomfortable but critical concern. Would Huey Long have threatened American democracy? Detractors often compared him to contemporaries like Mussolini or Hitler, framing him as a potential authoritarian leader using populism as a platform for consolidating dictatorial control. While this comparison could stem partly from elite fear of his policies, Long's governance in Louisiana does lend some weight to concerns over his appetite for authority. Long's presidency likely would have been a mixed bag when it came to civil rights. While his economic reforms were universal on paper, Long made little effort to tackle racial inequality directly. In the culturally segregated South of the 1930s, his programs primarily benefited poor white populations while ignoring or sidelining the concerns of Black Americans. Would President Long have expanded these blind spots nationally or used them as a political compromise to unite the South behind his agenda? Still, his economic vision, if implemented inclusively, might have indirectly brought progress for marginalized groups living in poverty. One of the most explosive questions here is how President Long would have handled America's growing role on the world stage. Long was famously skeptical of global intervention and likely would have championed an isolationist stance. While Roosevelt began preparing the groundwork for aiding allied nations, Long might have resisted entangling the United States in another global war. This approach could have dramatically altered World War II's course. Would Britain and the Soviet Union have survived Nazi Germany without U.S. aid? Would Japan have engaged with a less militarized United States? It's conceivable that Long's reluctance to escalate military buildup might delay, or even prevent, America's involvement in the war. Alternatively, if circumstances forced him into action, how would Long handle wartime leadership? His populist rhetoric and extensive public works background might have allowed him to rally broad support for a national war effort, but his lack of international diplomacy could have posed serious challenges. Had Huey Long served 1 or 2 terms as president, he could have radically altered the American political system. A wealth redistribution platform fulfilling programs like universal pensions and free education could have left a lasting legacy, potentially creating a more equitable society. Furthermore, his aggressive infrastructure investments might have accelerated national modernization. However, his methods could prompt a darker legacy. A weakened system of checks and balances, suppressed political opposition, and potential authoritarian tendencies might have left the American democratic experiment in jeopardy. The long-term consequences of his presidency might rest heavily on who followed him into the Oval Office. Would Long's movement inspire more populist reformers or set a precedent for centralized executive power? If nothing else, a Huey Long presidency would be polarizing. His policies favored working-class Americans but alienated the wealthy and powerful elite. His governing style inspired loyalty among followers but hostility from opponents. Whether he could unite a fractured Depression-era nation or deepen the divides would depend heavily on how Americans confronted his vision for wealth redistribution and concentrated leadership. The 1930s context was ripe for disruption. The lines between democratic reform and authoritarian ambition blurred for leaders across the globe, a pattern Huey Long's presidency might have followed, for better or worse. The potential ripple effects of a President Long extend beyond America. His isolationist leanings and inward focus might have upended global geopolitics. Without Roosevelt's interventionist policies, fascist regimes could have expanded their influence unchecked. Alternatively, Long's radical approach to governance might have inspired movements in other nations, sparking discussions about wealth redistribution and populism globally. Would Long's vision have bolstered America's soft power as a model for progress, or weakened its reputation as an advocate for democracy? These unanswered questions make imagining his role in the world order both fascinating and unnerving. So, what if Huey Long became president? It's a question as thrilling as it is unsettling. On one hand, Long's bold economic reform and dedication to helping the working class might have built a fairer, more inclusive America. Alternatively, his penchant for consolidating power and democratic shortcuts could have eroded the country's foundations of representative governance. This speculative exercise isn't just about decoding history, it's about understanding the fine line between reform and overreach. History often hinges on pivotal figures like Huey Long, whose unfulfilled potential looms large with both hope and forewarning. The story of Huey Long reminds us that leadership isn't just about vision. It's about how that vision respects and sustains democracy. What do you think? Would Huey Long have been the savior America needed during its darkest days, or a danger to the nation's democratic ideals? Let us know in the comments, and don't forget to join the discussion. Like and subscribe for more from History Twist. And remember, you can request your own video in the comments.